Tropical Storm Cristobal makes landfall over Louisiana, packing strong winds and rain. The White House is considering a Trump speech on the nation's race and unity. Video shows law enforcement officers slashing the tires of Minneapolis protesters. A Michigan police chief who tweeted "Unleash the real cops" on these barbarians in response to protesters is placed on leave. Why protesters want to defund police departments. And James Bennet resigns from the New York Times after cotton op-ed backlash. A woman shot with a rubber bullet in Fort Lauderdale demands reform and is considering a civil lawsuit. I can't breathe. The officer charged with firing a stun gun at a black man as he walked away. And Milwaukee area woman blocked off Black Lives Matter protesters and spit on a black man. Let's get to the news. Tropical Storm Cristobal has made landfall over southeastern part of Louisiana on Sunday evening, the National Hurricane Service announced, packing strong winds and rain after triggering early flooding and at least one damaging tornado in Florida. People waterside communities outside of New Orleans' levee system faced the urgent calls to evacuate Sunday afternoon. Cristobal has packed some sustaining winds up to about 50 miles per hour nearing the coast, as the forecasters warned that the storm would affect a wide range reaching up at least to 180 miles. President Trump has urged and issued a state of declaration of emergency for Louisiana as the storm approached the coast. Meanwhile, in Florida, however, tornadoes have uprooted trees and downed power lines south of Lake City near Interstate 75. No injuries have been reported. First and foremost, the thoughts and prayers go out to the families and people affected by this tropical storm. Just to update you on some of what I have come across as I did the commentary on this story. The tropical storm has spawned damaging tornadoes in Orlando and Louisiana. 8 to 10 people have been killed in a rip current. So that's 8 to 10 people thus far that have their lives have been claimed from this tropical storm. So once again, our thoughts and prayers go out to the people. After a week of massive peaceful protests across the country, the White House officials are currently deliberating a plan for President Donald Trump to address the nation this week on issues related to race and national unity. As the Housing and Urban Development Secretary Ben Carson hinted in an interview with CNN on Sunday, and a senior administration official said it was under serious consideration. Allies and aides of the president were not comfortable with the backlash over his decision to have federal officers aggressively clear Lafayette Park in front of the White House to facilitate a widespread planned attempt at a photo op in front of St. John's Church. And the rest of the week continued on a downward spiral as protests across the country grew and Trump's faced an onslaught of well-known conservative generals and former Trump administration officials who responded for calls for new leadership come November. Okay, so here's my thoughts on this. It's like that JoJo song, A Little Too Late. I think these generals, as well respected as they are in the conservative circle, they should have been saying something a long time ago when they were a part of the administration, when it was okay putting kids in cages and ripping families apart that were coming across the border with no intention of bringing them back together. That was okay. Tons of other things was okay. And all of a sudden, is it because there are black, brown, white, Asian, and other persuasions? Is this the reason why now he's a problem and we should look to new leadership come November? He's been a problem. He was a problem when you was a part of the administration, and neither one of you said anything against what he was doing, even in your position, to show that you honored the presidency more than the person occupying the office. So it's just a little too late for me. I say thanks, no thanks, but just my thoughts. A week ago, there were many reports out of Minneapolis that protesters, reporters, and even medics had found the tires of their cars were slashed at some point during the night of protests. Witnesses said at the time that law enforcement officers had carried out the act, and now there is clear evidence to support that claim. Mother Jones located video footage that shows officers slashing tires at a highway overpass. The officers at the scene appeared to be a mixture of state troopers and county police officers. Here's my thoughts on this particular story. Two things. One, you could say maybe slashing the tires, although it was a bit out there, could have been for safety measures, so nobody would jump in the car and use the car as a weapon to, kill other protesters and people. That's possible. But you could still do it even with flat tires. A little harder, but I guess you could still do it. The other thing though, which makes it less likely that was the case, because they was even doing that to medical vehicles, which kind of makes me go, are you trying to do this deliberately, almost to create like a war zone? They do that a lot in war. They slash the tires in cars and kind of use the cars as shields and things of that nature. So I'm just a bit, and these are your own citizens, your own people, and that's the part that I hugely have a problem with. That you bring these enforcers in and they are going far beyond to their own citizens. I have a huge problem with that, and that needs to be addressed, and those people who have done those acts need to be held accountable. I think for so long, if there's been this non-touchable authority to the law enforcement community, to in which they can do things and not kind of get any retribution for the actions that they take. And I think now we need to start holding these law enforcement officers of every caliber accountable. Because how could you be in charge of enforcing the laws when you break them at the same time? In the, I guess, eyes of keeping order, but that's not, you're destroying somebody's property for what? So I don't know. Again, just my thoughts. Michigan Police Chief Robert Shalad was placed on administrative leave after tweets promoting police action against protesters surfaced. The Twitter account had been since deleted, but screenshots show that the chief of Shelby Township Police advocating to unleash the real cops and let them take care of these barbarians. Trump threatened to deploy the military. I have a better idea. Unleash the real cops and let them take care of these barbarians. I promise it will be over in 24 hours. Cops are crippled by politicians and the media. Read one tweet from Sheepdog 711's account. Another tweet called for body bags for the demonstrators protesting the death of George Floyd. A group Shalad referred to as vicious, subhuman, and wild savages. An investigation has been opened by the township. After a unanimous vote by the Board of Trustees. Prior to the meeting, the township issued a statement saying that they were aware of the comments. At this time, Shelby Township is gathering facts about the situation, and it is premature to comment any further. Shelby Township will keep the public informed as this situation develops, the statement said. While an apology is insufficient and an insult to the gravity of my comments, I humbly and respectfully ask for the courtesy of forgiveness to those I have offended, to my department, and more importantly, to those I am sworn to serve, he said. Okay, let's start calling a thing here. I'm not even gonna mix words or even go back and forth with what he possibly meant. He knew exactly what he meant. He was referring to people of color being barbarians and almost superhuman. There goes that line again from good old Hillary Clinton back in the 90s of black youth being superhuman predators of some sort, because he surely wasn't talking about any of his lily white kind that was protesting alongside, I'm sure. This is sad, and it's a situation in which all the time now it seems to be coming out in these people's social media that they have these biases and are racist language and bigoted language, and then they come back and want to apologize and how humbly sorry they are for how what they said may have affected people. You who had no problem thinking about that as you was typing it, as them Twitter fingers was rolling, you had no problem or no kind of conscience to think about how will this affect me and my job and the people around me. But once once it spread like wildfire, then it became such a problem, and you were so humble and deeply concerned. That's BS, and I am glad that in many instances this cancel culture has taken off to where in which cancel him, and he shouldn't be able to be hired someplace else. But of course, we all know the reality is you're gonna go to some hick town that agrees with you and agrees with your stance and get rehired somewhere. Now that needs to stop as well. The idea that the police are the only answer to preventing crime and protecting people is one that has been ingrained into American society, that it can be hard to imagine a different reality. But amidst a national uprising against police brutality and systematic racism, activists say it is time to reimagine what the public actually needs. In the wake of George Floyd's death, people say that it is time to defund the police departments and put that money towards community programs like after-school programs for students and housing assistance for the disenfranchised and disadvantaged communities. Among racial injustice activities and activists, the idea isn't new. Organizers, including in Minneapolis, have already been calling to defund the police for some time, but now the idea has taken up by protesters across the country who say efforts to reform the police department have been unsuccessful, and it is time to curtail the role of the police play in society. The U.S. spends more than $100 billion on policing per year. For many major cities, the police department's budget makes up a disproportionate amount of the overall spending, even as other departments face steep cuts amidst the coronavirus, now that spending is coming under scrutiny. Among the national groups calling to defund the police are the Black Lives Matter movement, which is currently collecting signatures for a petition calling for a national defunding of police. The movement of Black Lives Matter is a coalition of black organizations that include Black Lives Matter, is also calling to defund the police, and during a one-day action earlier this week encouraged people to press elected officials on that issue. A rally cry that spread across American cities. In Minneapolis, the demand has taken a new urgency. Even city council members have gotten into the call to dismantle the police department and start over with a community-based approach. In New York City, there are growing cries from both activists and officials to cut the New York City police department $6 billion budget. In Los Angeles, the mayor has announced that up to $150 million could be cut from the police budget and redirected to investments in communities of color. These nationwide calls to defund the police department are not new. A lot of the larger cities like New York, LA, Miami, I'm sure Florida has a large police budget. The budgets are so large that they are able to obtain military weapons and tanks and trucks to police the people. And these large budgets are the size of military budgets, like that the actual Pentagon gets to buy and create aircrafts and planes and ships and missiles and all types of stuff. So it's a huge problem, when you're when you're just policing ordinary citizens. It can be a bit extreme, and people can lose their lives due to these kind of situations that we have now with all this unrest. And there are people actually dying and being dangerously injured due to the type of firepower that the police departments have behind them. So yeah, it is definitely time to rethink the level of policing. You can look a city like London. They don't use guns. They don't use guns at all. They use batons, and I'm not even sure if they even have tasers, but they don't use guns. So I mean, it's time to start looking at how other people police, and maybe dialing it back a bit, because if you meet people with aggression, being an officer, they're going to meet you back with that same aggression. So I mean, again, just my thought. The editor of the New York Times editorial page, James Bennet, has resigned. Publisher A.G. Schlichenberger announced on Sunday Bennett's resignation comes after the publication of a controversial op-ed from Republican Senator Tom Cotton earlier in the week that drew significant criticism, including from dozens of newspaper staffers. Schlichenberger also said that a deputy editorial page editor who had publicly taken responsibility as overseeing the editing of the piece would be stepping off the masthead and reassigning to the newsroom. Katie Kingsburg, another deputy editorial page editor, will oversee the editorial page through the 2020 election. The tectonic reconstruction capping a week of turmoil inside the national papers of record, with staff engaging in debates over the publication of Cotton's op-ed and grilling the Times leadership over the process that led up to it. Cotton's piece, published on Wednesday with the title "Send in the Troops," argued the Insurrection Act could be invoked to deploy the military across the country to assist in local law enforcement, with unrest sparking by the death of George Floyd. The op-ed was published in the Times opinion section, but staffers from both opinions and the newsroom, which operate separately from one another, publicly dissented. Bennet initially defended running the op-ed, but later said his section was wrong to have published it and blamed it a breakdown in the editorial process. Schlichenberger announced that Bennet would depart, which stunned staffers, people familiar with the internal conversation, the Times told CNN Business. Okay, real quick on the breakdown of this. So the New York Times, which has at times made even Trump, tied him with Obama being the person of the year, they have somewhat kind of criticized Trump and then sometimes praised Trump. So you never know kind of where they fall as far as where they stand. But the op-ed in question was one that Senator Tom Cotton had wrote, and you could see his picture somewhere popped up here. He wrote and talking about bringing in the troops, basically the same act that the former presidents used, like during these civil rights movement, the children in the integration of schools, the Arkansas school district, when they had the troops come in to escort some of the children to school, that kind of act. But this is in a much different way to maintain peace and keep a level of peace. So it's pretty weird that they let that go through without any second thought, especially with the state that the nation is in right now, to have no concern or a bit, I guess, kind of placating to their people or to the base of Donald Trump that I'm sure don't read the New York Times, not a lot of them anyway. So it was very interesting that they even let that go. But as you can see, there's cancel culture everywhere. Because people don't really want to deal with the backlash, because then it starts to affect the company itself. And people look at the New York Times as a prestigious publication, and all of this can just tarnish the brand. So, attorneys for LaToya Radcliffe, the woman whose eye socket was fractured from a Fort Lauderdale police officer who shot her in the face with a form of a rubber bullet, says that their client is considering legal action, including filing a federal civil rights lawsuit, against the city and police. LaToya has a broad spectrum of legal options that we are considering. Filing a federal civil rights lawsuit is certainly among the options, her attorney Michael Davis told the Miami Herald in an email. We have not yet made any decision on what legal options she will pursue. Her decision will be in part dependent upon the city of Fort Lauderdale. The attorneys said that Radcliffe's primarily is seeking reform from the city and the police department. Cliff, age 34, a grant writer for a nonprofit organization, was protesting police brutality and the killing of George Floyd with a group of about 2,000 other people in downtown Fort Lauderdale on the 31st of May. Protesters who had been peaceful all day grew upset after an officer pushed a woman kneeling on the ground. Radcliffe had been trying to calm protesters down when the police used tear gas against them. As she was choking and being led away from the scene, an officer raised his rifle and launched a shot, a 2.5-inch hard form of projectile at her head, and from about 30 feet away. The shot could have been deadly, according to the Fort Lauderdale Police Department's policy on less lethal maneuvers. The Fort Lauderdale police chief, however, told the Miami Herald that the police has opened an internal affair investigation into the officer who fired the shot, and the officer's name has not been released publicly, and the department has so far denied the Herald's public record request for using a force report or other documents citing the ongoing investigation. Radcliffe intends to comply with the internal investigation, according to her attorneys, although she has not yet filed a form of complaint. Here's a prime example of the reason why people want to defund the police department across the country. They use excessive force, and then it becomes costly to the city because the city will have to wind up paying out to some of these people for their medical injuries. If you've watched any of the protests throughout the country, you could have seen the use of police vehicles pushing protesters or protesters coming towards police vehicles, and the police actually pushing their vehicles forward, actually injuring people, and all sorts of things. And this, of course, will cause people to then sue the city for damages. And especially when they're peaceful protests, because then there would be no need for excessive force. So although the police department would be claiming in their right to maintain order, if the protest is peaceful and there was no violence whatsoever, there was no need for you to use excessive force of that nature. So therefore it creates a problem, and the problem then lies your ass getting sued. So a lot of cities will need the extra money in the budget to make sure that they pay for legal fees and things of that nature. So we'll see how that goes. A white Virginia police officer was charged with assault after officials say he used unacceptable force on a black man that involved firing his stun gun and pressing a knee on the man's back. The Fairfax County Police Department says that Tyler Timberlake was arrested Saturday after a violent takedown of a black man Friday was caught on police body cam. The department says that Timberlake and other officers were responding to a call of a man in crisis wandering around in the roadway. The body cam shows that Timberlake fired his stun gun as the man walked away from him. The officer is then seen pressing his knee on the man's back, and the man says, "I can't breathe." Timberlake, an 8-year veteran of the force, and other officers involved were immediately relieved of their law enforcement duties as the police officers and placed on administrative leave, the department announced on Saturday. The officers charged come as the nation is still grappling with the outrage over the violent video of the police officers' encounter, such as the 2 Buffalo police officers who shoved the 75-year-old protesters, and the protesters over the brutality and continued into this past weekend following the death of course, George Floyd. Okay, my quick thoughts. Had it not been for the unrest that the country is in right now, would this even have gone to this level, to where in which these officers have been put on administrative leave and are being investigated due to their body cam coming back with either different information than what they placed on a report of some sort. So yes, it's a good thing, but it always makes you wonder, had we not be in this atmosphere right now, these stories would go untold, And again, we'll be back at the same situation because there's a culture in law enforcement that is very steeped in how one polices the other. And that needs to change sometimes by cleaning up the whole thing. I don't know. I get tired of reporting on it, but we have to, so we know what's out there. It's, you got to know the kind of devil you're dealing with. So yeah, truly, but a brighter day should come soon. I hope, anyway. In Milwaukee area, a woman hocked a loogie at a young black man who was a part of the Black Lives Matter protests, which she alleged tried to blocking off with her car. The whole thing was captured on video this weekend out in the Sherwood, Wisconsin area, just outside of Milwaukee. And you can see the older lady who is surrounded by younger folks who were there for the protests. She supposedly tried to block their path with her vehicle. Let's just take a look, shall we?
Get back to my car!
Don't do these last stories or do any commentary, but I will say I am very proud of that young man that he did not whoop that old lady's behind, because younger me would have probably went toe to toe with that old woman. And it also shows me who's more of the barbarians, us or them. That's just a thought. And once again, thank you for watching CCN Midday News. Hope you enjoyed. Please like, share, and subscribe. Also hit that notification button so you will never miss another news update. Have a great day. Peace.